Hi, my name's Trevor. I am a home bread baker. I've been doing it for a number of years, but over the last 3 years, I've developed a sourdough starter of my own that I made from scratch. And I've sort of come across or developed a number of tools, tips, tricks, videos that I've watched, friends who have helped me with ideas, and I thought it might be fun to put it all together in a series of videos and share it with you so that you can also make your own fabulous sourdough bread, olive sourdough, any kind of things that you can add to it if you want, or just plain. But I'll tell you, the result that I come up with, I'm really happy with. My family loves the bread, neighbors, friends that we give it away to love it. And so my whole hope here is that this is something that you will be able to learn from and make your own delicious sourdough bread. So let's get started. Okay, so let's bake some sourdough bread. I'm going to do plain sourdough this time. I do make variations of it. The olive sourdough is killer. I've done a rosemary potato olive sourdough, and I've got some friends who have done some grains. I've done a whole grain sourdough. You have to watch it with the whole grains. The bread tends not to rise as much if you do whole grains. The simpler, the better. I find the better rise, the nicer crust, good crumb, great texture, and good flavor. But let's talk about, for plain sourdough starter, the ingredients that you need. Obviously, we start with the sourdough starter itself. In here, I have about 300 grams of sourdough starter. Preferably, you want this to have peaked when you start the baking process, to be peaking or maybe just about to peak in its rise. This one has actually come down a little bit because I've been touching it a lot and picking it up, putting it down. So it's deflated a little bit, but it's about right to do this. So what I'm going to be using here is 200 grams of this sourdough starter. I'm going to use some fine sea salt. This is Baylene's. I'm going to be using about 24 grams of sea salt. This is tap water. I use filtered tap water. My house has a whole house water filter on it, so I don't have to use bottled water. You can, if you have a filter on your home tap, water system, that's great. I don't actually pay any attention to the temperature of the water. It's just as it comes out of the tap. It's usually, this is room temperature. It's fine. But anyway, I think one of the things that a lot of people will tell you is that the proportions and the ingredients when you're first putting this together are important. But I've found that, as with all things, there's some flexibility in all this stuff. So you need some fresh water. You need a bowl to mix it all up in. You're going to be using white whole wheat. I've got this in my Sistema container here. I love these things. If you don't have them, pick some up. They're easy to find. So you're going to need whole wheat flour. I typically use 100 to 150 grams of whole wheat flour. Then I use the bread flour to make it up to 1,000 grams total. So I'm going to be using 850, 900 grams of the bread flour with the 100 to 150 grams of whole wheat flour to make up my 1,000 grams of flour, with the 200 grams of starter and 750 grams of fresh water and 23 grams of salt. That's it. No chemicals, no preservatives, no commercial yeast. It's flour, water, sourdough starter, and salt. And that's everything you need. So let's get into it, and I'll show you how it should look as you're mixing it all up. I really like this scale. It's a digital scale. It's not expensive. OXO brand. You can get them anywhere online. I think I bought mine from Amazon. What's great about this one is that first of all, it has this great pull-out feature. So when you are putting something big like this bowl on your scale, and maybe you can't read the digital readout, then being able to pull this thing out just makes it so much easier to be able to see those things. And the other great piece about this is that it does have a backlight if you need it to be able to see that. This one always comes up with the pounds weight as its default. I actually use grams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bowl off, and I'm going to measure the salt first. So we're going to go from pounds to grams, and we're going to zero this out. And I'm going to take my Baleen fine sea salt, and we're going to pour this in until we see we've got 25 grams that we're going to use in the mix. So we just keep going. And you don't have to be exact about this. Anywhere between 23 and 25 will be fine. 25 might be a little on the salty side. I'm going to just take out a little bit there. Put that at about 24. 24 is good. So we've got 24 grams of the fine sea salt. Then I'm going to put on the bowl and zero it out. And the first thing we need is 200 grams of your sourdough starter. So you can see this one's been bubbling away quite nicely. Smells amazing. It's just got this sort of sweet sour smell. It's not acrid. I love it. So if it smells funky, it's probably not good. It should not smell funky. It should smell good. So what we're going to do is add 200 grams of the sourdough starter to start with. Hopefully you can see that. Turn it around a little bit. And it's coming out nicely. And most bakers will tell you that it's actually really important to get these measurements correct when you're baking. A lot of the rest of the things that you do, I don't know if you can see here, I'm just sort of capturing that leftover sourdough starter, and we're going to refresh this immediately so that it doesn't dry out on us. But I'm going to add the water first. So I'm 1 gram over. That's a paper clip. I think we're okay. I can live with that. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to zero out the scale, and now I'm going to add 750 grams of filtered or tap water if you have a filter, right over the sourdough starter like this. Again, measurements are important, so when you get close to the 750, you want to slow down a little bit because you don't really want to be taking water out if you can avoid it. It's better just to get it right there for the correct amount. Like I'm really close now, 748, 749. A little more dribble there. Should put us right there, 750 grams of water. And you'll see I've still got enough here to be able to refresh my starter as well, which is great. I'm going to use my dough, I think this is called a dough scraper or a dough hook. And I'm just going to mix this up a little bit just to get it hydrated, the sourdough starter. I don't know whether you can see that. It's turning this nice milky texture. There's not much coming off on the bread hook, and it's just this really nice, clean, milky look. Just a little stir there, get it going. And now I'm going to take my 25 grams or 24, 23 grams of sea salt and add it in. Now I've got a friend who actually leaves 100 grams of water behind until after he does his first turn, and he swears that that's a better recipe, but I'm so used to doing it the way I know because I've been doing this for a couple of years now. I just always do it this way. So you can muck around with it, mix it up a little bit if you want, change things up, maybe hold back some of the flour, hold back some of the water. This is just how I do it. It works. I'm happy with it, so I just wanted to share the one that I know works. So now I've mixed in the salt here. And again, you see this is just this nice sort of creamy, soupy texture. There's really not much of the sourdough that isn't hydrated yet. So I'm going to put that to one side for now, because what's really important is to get this starter refreshed again. Okay, so after you've refreshed your starter and put that on the side, back on a nice warm surface without a breeze, take your mixture here, stir it up again. Just keep everything nicely stirred up. You can see there's a little bit of stuff on there, but really not much. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out the flour that I need to add to this mixture. So again, we zero out the digital scale. And if you remember, we don't use all-purpose flour when we're baking sourdough. The all-purpose flour is just for your starter, for refreshing it. So what I typically do is I will start with my whole wheat flour. And this is King Arthur white whole wheat flour. It's organic, good stuff. And what you want to do here is I'm going to add 150 this time of this. So we got this going in here. And what I like about doing the whole wheat flour first is that if I mess up with this, like I'm at 160, which is fine. But if I mess up with this and I'm doing it after the bread flour, it's much harder to get just this stuff out. Whereas this is all going to cover the whole wheat flour, this bread flour. And if I mess up with my weights, then I can easily take some out and put it back into my container. So we're at 161. You want a total weight of 1,000 grams. I'm not even going to zero this out. I'm just going to go right on top of it, and I want to get it up to 1,000 grams. All right, nearly there. Okay, and you can see I went over slightly. So, oh, Hank the Hound says hello. Some delivery guy must be out there, or maybe it's the garbage truck. Okay, took a little bit out. We're down to $9.99. Let's go back up to 1,000. So now we've got 1,000 grams of flour. It's mixed up with about 150 grams of whole wheat, and the rest is just regular bread flour. Thank you, Hank. And so now I'm just going to mix this up a little bit just to make sure it's, you know, evenly mixed in before I add it to my starter mixture. So just turning it and putting this so that it's all nice and evenly mixed. The next thing we're going to do is start to add this to the mixture so that we can make the dough. Okay, that looks good. We'll put that to one side. From here, I'm stirring it here, you can see. Now what I'm going to do is add about half of this. Get about half of that in there. That's good. Put that down. And now what we're going to start to do is work this flour into the mixture. And I just sort of scoop it around, mess it up a little bit, get it nicely hydrated, start to turn it, pull it off the edges. And you can see it's making this what looks a bit like a batter. Kind of looks like a pancake batter at the moment because it's very, very wet as the flour is being absorbed into this mixture. And once we get it fairly well absorbed, then I'm going to add the rest of the flour. And you don't have to worry. I mean, if you look at it, it sort of looks kind of lumpy. I don't really worry about that. As long as you've got most of the flour well absorbed or hydrated into this mixture, what you're going to find is, because this is a slow process, it's a no-knead dough, you're going to find that this will all just eventually get absorbed over time in the natural course of the process. So I really wouldn't worry about it if you see sort of these lumps in here. That's not anything to be concerned about. Okay, I think I've got enough in here now that I'm just going to add the rest of the flour. So you can see here, make sure that I get it all in here. Sorry, if I was left-handed, you'd be able to actually see better what I'm doing, but I think you get the gist of it. So we've got that. That's all of the flour in there. And now we're going to just keep stirring it. I love this dough hook. It does such a great job. It mixes it really well. It's nice and easy to handle. Nice long handle, so you can get a good firm grip on it, and then you just keep turning your bowl, absorbing it in. You see how it's getting there, but it becomes much more dry and lumpy. Looks like it's going to tear. You've probably heard window pane test for dough to make sure that the gluten is fully activated and it's all been absorbed in here. That will come later on, but when you first mix this dough together, before it's had a chance to sit and do its initial autolyse and settle, this dough really likes to just sort of have periods of time where it's just completely left alone. So you're mixing this up. You can see it's coming together now. Still very lumpy, sort of, you know, clogs up, but it doesn't hold together well. And there's still quite a lot of flour, dried flour on the base that we're going to just try and get that incorporated as well. Okay, yep, that's good enough. Very lumpy, not very satisfying to look at. You certainly wouldn't want to eat it at this point, I don't think. Just get the excess off here. You want to wash this off immediately, because if you don't, it dries up hard as a rock. And one of the things that you've got to be really good about in your kitchen when you're baking is clean up as you go, because it just makes everything that much easier. Okay, so we've got that. Just scrape these sides down a bit, get it into the middle, and okay, that's what it looks like. Not very appetizing, but it will be. So the next thing we've got to do is cover this with some cling film. And this will sit at room temperature on preferably some wood or a relatively warm surface. Maybe I'm being too ambitious with one piece of cling film. Maybe I need two with this. Really all you need to do is cover it so that not too much air gets in it. You just don't want it to be exposed to the air and potentially dry out and have a crust form on top of it. So this is it now. We've finished the prep and it's going to sit quietly for about 30 minutes now. And at that point we'll come back and we'll do what we call a turn. It'll be the first turn. I'll show you how to do that. And we're going to do a few of those. We have 4 30-minute intervals. So we'll turn it 4 times after 30 minutes and then we'll leave it for 45 minutes, turn it again, leave it for another 45 minutes, and that'll be the final turn before you let it sit for a couple of hours. And after that, you're going to shape it and put it into the bannetons and put it into the fridge for an overnight rest for its final proofing. So 30 minutes from now, we'll come back and we'll see how it looks. We'll do a turn and we'll go from there. Okay, so it's been about 30 minutes since we finished pulling the dough together in the bowl, getting the mixture well hydrated and letting it rest for its first autolyse. We're going to now have 4 turns that happen in equal spacing of 30 minutes each. So over a 2-hour period, we're going to come back every 30 minutes and we're going to turn the dough. It's a no-knead process. So I'm going to show you now how I turn the dough. And just a quick tip, as you recall, the dough was in a bowl covered in cling film to keep it from drying out and forming a crust. When you come down and you want to pull the cling film off and turn the dough, you take the cling film off first, you wet your hands under the sink, and then turn the dough with wet hands because it's not as sticky if you've got your hands wet, and it'll turn easier, and it certainly doesn't hurt the mixture. And then you dry your hands off and put the cling film back on. So here we go, let's see how you turn the dough. Okay, so the first thing we do is we're going to come down here, we're going to take the cling film off so that it's dry. And let's just take a look at that so you can see it's still sort of dry, lumpy looking, a bit like porridge, not very attractive. First turn is always like this. So we've got the cling film off. I'm going to come over here, wet my hands a little bit, and then we come in here and we're going to start to turn this dough. So what I do is I put my hand in here and I pull it up, and look at that. It's sort of, tears easily. It's not well formed. The gluten really hasn't started to form in it, so it's incredibly lumpy. It sticks to your fingers a bit. But what you want to do is go around the bowl, pick it up, literally turn it. You're turning it. By the time you get to the end of this, you're probably going to turn it 4 times for each turn, and you're going to be amazed at how different it looks when you come to do a turn. Even next time, it's going to be different than it is now. So there you go. That's it. It's get as much of it back onto here as we can. And so there you go. That's what it looks like now. And I'm going to wash my hands off, put the cling film back on. We'll wait another 30 minutes and then we'll be ready to turn again. So that's the first turn over. Set your timer for another 30 minutes and we'll come back and do it all over again. Okay, so it's been about 30 minutes and we're back for the second of the 4 half-hour turns. So I'm going to do what I did last time. I'm going to take the cling film off here, which is shiny in the light and kind of distracting and annoying. So we'll get that out of the way. I'm going to rinse my hands off, again, keeping them wet. And we're going to go in here and make some turns, and hopefully you can see this, that it's already, look at that, how it has softened up completely, and the glutens are beginning to form just like they should. Look how much more silky that has become. Soft, pliable, great texture. It's beginning to pull away from the bowl a little bit on its own. And this is all we do, just like that. And then let it rest again. See, you still get quite a lot on your hands. Doesn't matter. Just peel off what you can. You can taste it if you like. Doesn't really taste that much though. off the cling film. Rinse my hands a little bit. And here we go. I'm going to tip this up a little bit so maybe you can see it a little bit better. Again, it hasn't, it's improving. And what we're beginning to see now is there are some bubbles beginning to form under the surface in certain areas. I don't know if you can see that there. See, we got some bubbles happening there. This is what should be happening as the gluten forms and the dough begins to really come together to get us to that window pane test spot. It's really nicely formed. I mean, I sometimes want to cheat and just bake it right now because it looks so good, but honestly, it's worth the wait. Just do it properly. Okay, so that's it. Nothing, just a quick turn. You can see there's not as much forming on sticking to my fingers now as there was to start with. It has flattened out in the bowl. If you remember when we first were turning it, it was much more condensed, lumpy, and sort of it didn't flatten into the bowl at all. This has had 45 minutes. It's definitely settled into the bowl. I can see it's beginning to rise a little bit. Not seeing any air bubbles still, which is sort of surprising. It feels like it's the right temperature, but we'll turn it and see how it looks. Okay, so digging in, it's much softer, and that's got a pretty nice, that's beginning to form a bit of a window pane there, you can see. And it smells great, look at that. Really just looking good. Sides there, flop it down. So notice it's still got some shape, it's sort of bulbous and round. By the time we come back and look at it again, it will have flattened out but risen just a little bit. And now we get on to the fun part, because we're going to turn the dough out, shape it, and put it to bed for the rest of the night. And I want to show you how the dough has formed. It's doing exactly what I wanted it to do. We've got a few things that are going to happen now. We've got the bannetons here, which I mentioned in a previous video segment. These are really important. These actually are quite small. I think they're maybe 14 inches long. Probably could have used larger ones, but these have worked for me, so I continue to use them. So we'll use these. We're going to use some spray. Typically I use like cooking spray or peanut oil. This one happens to be a grill spray. It's fine. It's just oil. It's going to be a coating for these guys. And then we're going to use this, which is the really important stuff, which is the rice flour. It's the non-stick flour that you put on the inside of these, and it will make sure that the dough doesn't stick when you turn it out tomorrow morning before we score it and put it in the oven to bake. And this, my favorite little gizmo doodad, I'm not quite sure what that's called, but it's like a silicone scraper thing. Really nice. It's got some flexibility on the edges, but it's kind of firm on the inside. And your bench scraper, which you also need. Make sure you have one of these. So let's get right into it, and I'm going to show you the dough, and we'll turn it out and start to form it into shapes and put it away for the night in the fridge. Okay, before I take the dough and scrape it out of the bowl, what I'm going to do is just coat these bannetons. You want to take a little bit of spray oil, and I I typically do it in the sink so that it doesn't get all over the counter. And just spray a thin layer of oil right on the inside of these guys. And then you want to take the rice flour, which is our non-stick agent, and I'm going to put that right in here. Just sprinkle a little bit in there. And then what you can see is I'm going to sort of turn it around here. Coat the inside of the banneton as much as I can, work it in a little bit so that you got a nice little layer of the rice flour. There you go. Can you see that? And I'm going to sprinkle some of this, because you really don't need to use bread flour at this point. Take off the cling film. Now what I want you to see here is the bubbles that are forming. See how much it's expanded in the bowl? It's probably about 1.5 times, maybe 2 times its original size. There's a nice bubble forming there. Some other bubbles that I can see underneath. So I'm going to sprinkle just a tiny bit of all-purpose flour over here like this, and we're going to get this guy out of the way. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit more on a clean surface here, and then we're going to turn this guy out. So what we want to do is just start to loosen it up on the edges. You don't want to work it any more than you have to. And it pops right out onto the counter like that. I'll wash up that bowl in a minute. Sprinkle a little bit more on top. Okay. Now what we want to do is separate this into 2 approximately equal halves. And it's kind of a weird shape, so I'm not going to be exactly right, and I'm not going to measure it because that's too much work, and the dough's sticky and you just sort of lose some of it. So we'll just eyeball it like this and hope we're close. Okay, that's probably pretty good. And I got a little bit of flour on here, which will be fine. So as I turn it over, that looks pretty good. I'm going to flip this one over. See how it's a little bit sticky? It's okay. Maybe a little bit more flour. Don't really need much on the insides here. I think one is larger than the other. I think this one is probably a little bit bigger, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shape these guys before they go into their bannetons. So take this, pull it up over here. Take that and pull it up over here. It's still sort of sticky. You see how it's sort of sticky? We're going to do this and this. And just sort of knitting it all together like this. And look how nice and clean that is. Sort of the shape that I want it to be before it goes into the banneton. So I'm going to flip it. Now that's a great shape there. I'm going to put a little more flour on here because this is the surface where we need to create surface tension so that it gets really good spring when we put it in the oven. And it's actually looking really nice. And what you can do is you just cup your hands like this and you pull it. If you feel like it's sticking too much, add some flour on your hands like this. Go both ways, and you'll see how it starts to really shape up nicely and create surface tension on the top here. And what you really want to do is create a nice seam on the bottom So I'm going to pull this over here, and again, just folding it in on itself like this. It's not complicated, but it wants to be nice and sticky so that it holds, and so that you can see here it's all really nicely pulled together here. I'm just going to flour my hands a little bit. I'm going to flip it over. See how there are bubbles here that are forming here at the end? This is good, I like this. So next thing we're going to do is bag them and put them into the refrigerator overnight, and then they will have rested. They'll do their final proofing. Everything just comes together really nicely, and when we put them in the oven tomorrow morning, they're going to have fabulous spring. We're going to score them, and they're going to come out looking, tasting, and just being amazing loaves of bread. So let's get them in the bannetons. Okay, these have sat for a couple of minutes and they are definitely ready to go in. Here are my bannetons, oiled and coated lightly with rice flour. I'm going to move this one out of the way a little bit just so that I can demonstrate pretty easily what I'm doing with this one. Here's my banneton. And basically, it's very simple. You need to be sort of bold and comfortable and relaxed. But you take the bench scraper, put your hand here, loosen it up underneath, roll it onto your hand, and just pop it in here, nice and easy. Just get it so that you got everything settled in nicely there. Look at that, that fits pretty nicely, right? Got a little bit of unevenness near here, some marks where I think that will all even out over time. We're going to bag this one, it'll look really good. Let's get the next one in. Okay, so here's number 2. Here's the banneton. Again, nice easy movement right onto your hands. Just gently work it into the banneton. I'm going to put a little bit more flour on here because the moisture will show up on the top of them overnight as they rest in the fridge, and this will just help keep them a little bit dry. And so what you want to do now is you take the big old Ziploc bags that you can get at the grocery store and we bag them. Get them open. Oops. Put one in here. Zip her up. Not too much air in there, just enough. Put that one there. And we'll bag this one. Zip it up. And bag this one. These guys are ready to go into the fridge for their overnight rest. It's now almost 9 o'clock. I refreshed my sourdough starter when we first started this process, and that was probably 6 or 7 hours ago, maybe longer. But I wanted to show this to you before we call it a night. See how all the air bubbles in there? It's growing. It's probably going to go for another couple of hours before it starts to decline and lose its volume. We'll refresh it again tomorrow. I'll show you that before I bake. But this is really healthy. It's really nice. There's lots of really good, strong air bubbles in here. It's growing nicely. I'm really happy with this. So this baby's doing well. The 2 loaves are happy, snug as a bug in the fridge. And tomorrow we'll come back and bake, and we'll see how the result is. So. All right, we're back. Day 2 of sourdough baking video tutorial demonstration. And I've got a couple of things that I'm going to do today. I'm waiting for the oven to heat up, and I've got my clay baker in there. It's on a stone. Not everybody uses a stone. You don't have to have one. I have a good one that fits well in there. I like it. I use it all the time. It does help with consistent heating in the oven. But I'm going to start today by taking my sourdough starter, which you remember we used yesterday to create the mix. Well, this guy went all the way up overnight and is all the way back down. I'm a little later getting it refreshed than I wanted, but it's been less than 24 hours, so won't be a problem. So I'm going to refresh this guy first while I'm waiting for the oven to warm up, and then we're going to get the loaves out of the fridge and take them out, score them, and bake them. So we are ready to bake our bread. A few things that you should be thinking about in terms of process and tools that you need to do the actual baking today. So I put my my loaves into the fridge at about 8:30 last night, I think. It's about 8:30, and it's now about 11:30 the next day. So you know, they've had 15 hours to rest in the refrigerator and get all goodgy and ready to go, and hopefully we're going to have a great bake today. Some of the things that we're going to use to prep and bake, I have my clay baker is already in the oven. It's on a stone, and I've got the oven set to 500 degrees. And we're going to bake for the first 20 minutes at 500 degrees with the clay baker lid on. And that's what it retains the moisture from the dough when it goes in, and it helps to really just create incredible spring and form that crust and really give us a nice bake. And so what we're going to need when it comes out of the oven, you need a cooling rack, which I have here. You can pick those up anywhere. We are going to use the bench scraper again. You'll probably want a thermometer until you get comfortable with timing and temperature and make sure that it works out right. You want your the internal temperature of your bread to be somewhere around 185, 200, 205, 210. It can be anywhere in that range pretty much as it comes out of the oven. I find consistently 20 minutes at 500, 20 minutes at 475 with the lid off, and it comes out the same temperature every time. But anyway, for a while, until you get used to it, you can measure it and make sure it's okay. All-purpose flour to sprinkle on the dough and also on the counter surface so that it doesn't stick to the counter surface. And this trusty little gizmo here, this one I had made specially for me. It's what we call a lame in the business. I think it's derived from French. You spell it L-A-M-E with an accent over it. Then you need gloves because you don't want to burn yourself. That's all the tools. I think I just heard the oven beep, so we're ready to go. I'm going to go get the bread out of the first bread out of the fridge, and we'll get started. All right, so here's my first loaf. What you'll see, if there's not too much reflection from the overhead lights, is that there's a fair amount of moisture on the inside on top of the bag, which is completely normal. What might surprise you when you look in here and I take it out is that it hasn't really risen very much. It's pretty much as it was when it went in. It has settled all the way into the banneton, and you can see, maybe not, there's just a little bit of moisture on the top of the dough. Sometimes I will take a piece of paper towel and just dab it on there. See if we can get the excess moisture off. You really don't want the excess moisture on this because this is going to be the bottom of the loaf, and you don't want it sticking to the counter here, because if you have that happen, then it's really hard to get it off. And so you just want to sprinkle a little flour. I'm just using all-purpose flour here onto the surface. You don't want too much, just enough, about like that, and maybe a little bit onto the dough where you see any moisture. And then here is the real magic. So what we're going to do is turn this out onto the counter, tap it a little bit to get it out of the banneton. And hey, Hanky. Hank says, good morning, everybody. And there it is. You can see that the pops out of the banneton really nicely. And Hank, thank you. That's enough. Like I said yesterday, the rice flour acts as a sort of a non-stick agent, and it's really easy. So all you want to do with these guys after you've popped out the dough is rinse them with warm soapy water, get the stuff out of the little nooks and crannies, and then let it completely dry. Do not put these away or put them in the Ziploc bag unless they are 100% dry, because they will form mold and you don't want that. So just make sure they're clean and dry. Okay, I like to sprinkle just a little bit of flour on top because it helps with the patterning and how it looks when it comes out of the oven. So I just do a little bit like this. Scoring is, you know, baker's preference. However you want to do it, it doesn't really matter. For these, what I like to do is just one score all the way down the middle, because it really opens the bread up when it with spring when it's in the oven, and lets it rise fully. Some people like to do squares, circles, get fancy. This one, I'm just going to do a straightforward pull here all the way along like that. So you can see how, I'm just going to go one more time here just to get it nice and deep all the way down the sides, and that's all I'm going to do for it. Now it's going to go in the oven. So to do that, the first thing I've got to do is open the oven door, pull the stone forward as far as it'll go in the oven, and pull this as far forward as I can as well. Take the lid off, put it here, obviously using oven gloves because we don't want to burn ourselves. And this is where you have to be a little bold and have courage. And I use this, take the bread, I drop it right in there, quickly put the lid on, make sure it's okay, close up the oven, shut the door, set the timer for 20 minutes at 500, and then we will come back and look at it. I'll turn it, take the lid off, and bake it for another 20 minutes at 475. All right, we're back, and the bread has been in the oven in the clay baker on the stone at 500 degrees for just about 20 minutes now with the lid on. What we're going to do is reduce the temperature down to 475 for the final 20 minutes. I'm going to take the lid off and I'm going to rotate the clay baker and put it back in the oven for the final 20 minutes. So we'll turn the timer back to another 20 minutes and we'll reduce the bake to 475. And now we open the oven. Very hot. If you have glasses, they will steam up. And we'll take this off, and you can see what a fabulous look that has. See the ears that are forming on either side? It's got really nice spring. It's beginning to brown on the very outside edges. I've turned it around. I slide it back in there. Close the oven up. In 20 minutes time, we'll take a look and see what the finished product is. So 20 minutes, see you there. Okay, the second half bake is almost done with the lid off, and we're getting ready to take the bread out, pop it out of the clay baker, and we're going to let it rest on the cooling rack until it gets down to, you don't really want to cut into it until it's probably room temperature or cooler. And then that'll be the real proof of what our bake is like, and see whether or not it tastes good, looks good, how's the crumb, plenty of air holes, is the taste good, is there the right moisture in there, is the crust good. You'll find that the crust actually improves over the next 24 hours or so, gets a little harder. And so I think that typically what we do is we'll leave it, maybe I would eat it this evening with dinner, or tomorrow at about the same time, 24 hours. If I haven't used it and I'm not planning to use it, I will slice the entire loaf and then put it in a Ziploc bag, vacuum seal it as best I can, and throw it in the freezer, and then it'll last as long as you want and you have access to it any time. Because there's no commercial yeast, no preservatives, it typically, 2 days is it. If you haven't eaten it in 2 days, then it does need to go in the freezer. Okay, the timer is going off and it's time to take a look and see what kind of a bake do we have here. So I'm gonna turn off the kitchen timer. I'm actually gonna set the oven to 500 again, because I have a second loaf that I've got to bake, so I want that temperature to come back up. And let's pull this guy out and see how it looks. Okay, 575. That's pretty good. Golden. I'm actually going to leave that in for a minute more. I think it could be a little darker than it is. Don't know if you can see that clearly. Hopefully the lights aren't too bad. So I'm actually going to put it back in for another, 2 2 or 3 minutes. You know, the oven's heating up, so that's going to help. We'll come back and come out. I want it to be just a little bit darker in color on the outside before I take it out, and then I'll test the temperature and make sure that I didn't go too far. Okay. All right, let's have another look. It's been maybe 3-4 minutes max. Oven is increasing in temperature, so it all happens fairly rapidly, honestly. And that's about where I want it to be now. I'm going to close this oven up, make sure that it continues to come up to temperature, and I'm going to check the temperature on this, and hopefully you will be able to see it. I'm going to go right in here, and that has come up to 211. That's at about 211. Hopefully you can see that, which is perfect. That's fine. I think anything below 185, you're probably going to have a problem. Much above 210, it might dry out, and that's not good. So look at that. Fabulous, fabulous spring. Great ears on there. Nice golden color. I always like how the patterning turns out from the flour that you dust the loaf with. A lot of people like to tap the bottom, see if it sounds hollow. That sounds pretty good. And then pop it down here. And actually it's too hot for me to hold in my hands, but I just want you to get a really good look at that. That is a beautiful, beautiful loaf. Nicely finished. It's going to have a nice crunchy crust, and hopefully it's going to be beautifully soft and moist inside and have that fabulous sourdough taste. I'm pretty happy with that bake, I have to tell you. So we'll let that dry off, and then we'll slice into it and see how it looks. But I'm very happy with that. All right, well, here we are. Hank very kindly agreed to join me for the final segment. He blends kind of nicely with the bread, and I think he was as participatory in this video tutorial segment as as I was at times. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something from it. I hope you'll be able to take some of the tips, tricks, and other ideas that I shared and produce something that I think is really fabulous and delicious. Here's the final result, and we're going to cut into it now. And I'll cut it right down the middle just to see. It's got a nice crunch. It's been about, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours maybe since it came out of the oven. It smells amazing. And here you can see, hopefully, I'm going to bring it in a little bit. Look how great that looks on the inside. Just a beautiful, even distribution of holes throughout. If you could see it closely, you'd see that there's really a nice sort of a shiny appearance on the inside of the holes, which is what you're looking for. That's where you know you've got a little bit of moisture. It turned out really, really beautifully, and I'm going to cut just one piece off the end here. This makes fabulous toast. You can serve it just with olive oil, with cheese. Here again you can see some good holes there. We have it for breakfast all the time, and what I really like is just a little bit of butter on there. Boy, that really does it as well if you don't have a fancy olive oil. And as Jacques Pepin would say, happy cookie. Oh, man. That's good. There's someone else who wants a bite too. Cheers.